Before we dive in, let me know in the comments what country are you watching from. I'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. My name is Bennett, and what I'm about to tell you happened during what should have been a peaceful family bonding cruise to Alaska. In September 2018, I was 45 years old at the time, recently divorced and desperately trying to reconnect with my two teenagers who had been living with their mother for the past year. My son Case was 16 and going through that typical rebellious phase where he barely spoke to me, while my daughter Iris was 14 and still dealing with the emotional aftermath of our family's dissolution. I thought a 10-day Alaska cruise on a smaller expedition vessel would be perfect for us, offering spectacular scenery, wildlife viewing opportunities, and enough shared experiences to help us rebuild our fractured relationships. But what we encountered during those 10 days in the frigid northern waters turned our healing journey into a nightmare that still haunts all three of us and has left us with psychological scars that family therapy continues to address years later. The vessel we had booked was one of those boutique expedition ships that accommodated only about 200 passengers, designed specifically for navigating Alaska's challenging coastal waters and providing intimate access to glaciers, fjords, and remote wilderness areas that larger cruise ships couldn't reach. The ship was equipped with all the modern safety features and navigation technology you would expect, but it also had that rugged, adventurous feel that appealed to travelers seeking authentic experiences rather than the sanitized entertainment of massive floating resorts. Our cabin was comfortable enough for the three of us, with twin beds for the kids and a fold-out sofa for me. And during the first few days of our voyage, it seemed like my plan for family reconnection might actually work. Case had started showing genuine interest in the wildlife photography opportunities, and Iris was fascinated by the glaciology presentations offered by the ship's naturalist guides. The weather during our first 3 days was absolutely perfect, with clear skies, calm seas, and those incredible panoramic views of snow-capped mountains rising directly from the water that make Alaska cruises so popular with photographers and nature enthusiasts. We saw humpback whales, orcas, sea otters, and countless seabirds, all against the backdrop of pristine wilderness that felt completely untouched by human civilization. The kids were finally starting to relax and engage with me in ways they hadn't since before the divorce, and I began to feel hopeful that this trip might be the turning point our family desperately needed. But on our fourth day, as we sailed deeper into the remote waters of Southeast Alaska, something began to change in ways that defied every rational explanation I could muster. As someone who had spent his entire career in meteorology and atmospheric sciences, I first noticed the anomaly during the early morning hours of our fourth day, when I stepped onto our cabin's small balcony to enjoy my coffee and watch the sunrise over the magnificent landscape. Instead of the clear skies that had characterized our voyage so far, I observed a single perfectly circular storm cloud formation hovering directly above our ship, maybe 2,000 feet up, dark and rowing with internal electrical activity that created an almost constant display of lightning within its confines. But what made this cloud formation truly bizarre was that the surrounding sky remained completely clear for as far as I could see in every direction, as if this localized storm system existed in complete isolation from the normal weather patterns affecting the region. My professional training immediately told me that what I was observing was meteorologically impossible. But there it was, following our vessel like some kind of atmospheric parasite that had attached itself to our ship. Over the next several hours, as we continued our planned itinerary through the Inside Passage, the mysterious storm cloud maintained its position directly above us, never moving ahead or falling behind, but always centered perfectly over our vessel, regardless of our course changes or speed adjustments. The ship's captain, a veteran of Alaska waters with over 20 years of experience navigating these challenging routes, made several announcements trying to reassure passengers that we were experiencing an unusual but not dangerous weather phenomenon. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, and his explanations didn't align with anything I knew about atmospheric physics or regional weather patterns. By midday, the cloud had begun producing intermittent rain and hail that affected only our immediate area, While other ships visible on the horizon continued to enjoy clear skies and calm conditions, the situation became truly frightening on our fifth day when the storm cloud began generating increasingly violent weather that seemed to be specifically targeting our vessel. The winds intensified to gale force levels that rocked our relatively small ship with tremendous force, sending most passengers to their cabins with severe seasickness. But what disturbed me most was the consistency of the storm's behavior. It never moved away from our position, never dissipated or weakened, and never seemed to follow normal meteorological patterns that would cause it to drift with prevailing winds or pressure systems. Instead, it maintained its position above us with the kind of precision that suggested some form of intelligent control rather than natural weather phenomena. And when I consulted the ship's weather monitoring equipment, I discovered that other vessels in the area were reporting completely different atmospheric conditions than what we were experiencing. By our sixth day, the storm had intensified to the point where the captain was forced to alter our itinerary significantly, canceling planned stops at several scenic locations and heading for more protected waters where he hoped we might find relief from the increasingly dangerous conditions. But the storm followed us with relentless determination, producing weather that grew more violent and unpredictable with each passing hour. Waves that should have been impossible in the relatively sheltered waters we were navigating began battering our ship with tremendous force, and the constant lightning strikes were creating electromagnetic interference that affected our communication and navigation systems in ways that made the crew visibly nervous about our ability to safely complete the voyage. The most disturbing aspect of our ordeal was the effect the storm began having on the passengers and crew, particularly the psychological impact of being trapped under what felt like a malevolent weather system that seemed to be deliberately tormenting us. People began reporting shared nightmares about drowning, strange auditory hallucinations that sounded like voices calling from the stormy waters around us, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to intensify whenever we tried to move away from the storm's influence. My own children were experiencing these symptoms, with Case becoming increasingly withdrawn and Iris suffering from panic attacks that required medical attention from the ship's doctor. But what frightened me most was my own growing conviction that we were dealing with something far beyond normal meteorological phenomena. On our seventh day, as the storm reached what seemed like impossible levels of intensity, we began receiving radio transmissions on maritime emergency frequencies that defied explanation. The messages came in multiple languages that none of our crew members could identify, but the tone and rhythm suggested some form of communication or warning. These transmissions always occurred during the most violent weather episodes, and they seemed to be originating from locations that corresponded with the storm center directly above our ship. The captain and his officers were clearly disturbed by these unexplained communications, but they had no explanation for what we were hearing or why our radio equipment was picking up signals that shouldn't have existed in these remote waters. The breaking point came during our eighth night at sea, when the storm produced weather conditions that pushed our vessel to the absolute limits of what it could safely endure. Winds exceeded hurricane force levels. Waves reached heights that should have been impossible for the protected waters we were navigating. And the constant lightning strikes were creating electrical phenomena that I had never encountered in my professional career. The ship was being thrown around like a toy, and several passengers were injured by flying objects and furniture that broke loose despite being supposedly secured for rough weather. But what truly terrorized everyone aboard was the realization that we were completely isolated from any possibility of rescue or assistance. The storm had effectively cut us off from normal communication with the outside world, and our isolation was being maintained by weather conditions that seemed to exist solely for the purpose of trapping us. During that terrifying night, as our ship fought for survival against weather that defied rational explanation, I made a discovery that changed my understanding of what we were experiencing while trying to comfort my children in our cabin. I noticed that the storm's behavior was somehow synchronized with the emotional state of the passengers, intensifying whenever fear and desperation reached peak levels, and calming slightly during moments when people managed to find hope or maintain composure. This observation led me to suspect that we weren't just victims of freakish weather, but rather participants in some kind of psychological experiment or supernatural phenomenon that was feeding off our terror and desperation. The storm seemed to be sustained by our fear growing stronger as we became more frightened and desperate. On our 9th day, after nearly a week of being tormented by this impossible weather system, the captain made the decision to attempt a desperate maneuver that might break us free from whatever was holding us captive, rather than continuing to fight against the storm or trying to outrun it. He decided to head directly into its center, reasoning that if this was indeed some form of artificial or supernatural phenomenon, confronting it directly might be our only chance of escape. The decision was incredibly risky, as it meant deliberately steering our small vessel into the most dangerous part of the storm system. But with our supplies running low and several passengers requiring medical attention that we couldn't provide, we had no choice but to attempt this desperate gambit. As we entered the storm's eye, something extraordinary happened that convinced me we had been dealing with forces beyond normal meteorological science. The center of the storm was not the calm, clear area that you would expect in a natural hurricane or cyclone, but rather a space filled with swirling mists and strange optical phenomena that created the impression of vast depths extending both above and below our ship. Within this supernatural space, we could hear those mysterious radio transmissions much more clearly, and they seemed to be coming from what sounded like other vessels that had been trapped in similar circumstances. Ships that had disappeared in these waters over the decades, their crews still trying to communicate with the outside world from whatever dimension or reality they had been pulled into by this atmospheric predator. The escape from our week-long nightmare came suddenly and without warning. After what felt like hours of navigating through the supernatural eye of the storm, we suddenly found ourselves in completely calm waters under clear skies. With no trace of the massive weather system that had been tormenting us for nearly a week, the transition was so abrupt and complete that it felt like emerging from one reality into another. And when we checked our position using GPS and traditional navigation methods, we discovered that we were exactly where we should have been according to our original itinerary, as if the entire ordeal had occurred in some kind of temporal bubble that didn't affect our actual progress through the physical world. The psychological aftermath of our experience has been ongoing for years. My children required extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of what we had endured, and our family relationships, which I had hoped the cruise would repair, were forever changed by the shared terror we had experienced. Case developed a severe phobia of water that prevents him from swimming or participating in any aquatic activities, while Iris suffers from chronic anxiety and nightmares that intensify whenever storm systems approach our area. For my part, I left my career in meteorology because I could no longer trust my understanding of atmospheric science after witnessing weather phenomena that contradicted everything I had been trained to believe about how natural systems behave. The most disturbing aspect of our experience was discovering months later that we were not the first family to encounter this phenomenon in Alaska waters. Research into maritime records revealed a pattern of vessels reporting similar experiences over the past several decades. Ships that had encountered localized storm systems that followed them for days produced impossible weather conditions and seemed to feed off the fear and desperation of their passengers and crews. But in most cases, these reports were dismissed as exaggerated accounts of natural weather events or psychological reactions to the stress of severe storms. The official records contain no acknowledgement that something genuinely supernatural might be occurring in these remote waters. Today, more than 5 years after our terrifying Alaska cruise, my family still struggles with the lasting effects of what we experienced during those 10 days. We have never taken another vacation that involves traveling over water, and we maintain emergency supplies and communication equipment in our home because we learned firsthand how quickly normal life can be disrupted by forces beyond human understanding or control. The experience taught us that there are aspects of our world that science cannot explain or predict, and that sometimes the most dangerous threats are those that exist just beyond the boundaries of what we consider possible. My name is Harper, and I'm 28 years old. What happened to me during a luxury cruise in 2020 still haunts me. I was a travel blogger. I thought this would be my dream assignment, a 14-day crossing from New York to Southampton. I was documenting luxury solo travel. Everything seemed perfect at first, but what I discovered turned my dream into a nightmare. The ship was beautiful. Only 600 passengers, spacious suites with private balconies, multiple fine dining venues, world-class spa. My suite was perfect. Marble bathroom, stunning ocean views. For the first few days, I loved my work. I photographed the elegant interiors. I documented culinary experiences. I interviewed interesting passengers. Everything was going perfectly. Then I noticed something strange. There was another passenger, a man in his early 50s, well-dressed and sophisticated. He kept appearing wherever I was working. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Small ships mean seeing familiar faces, but he always had his phone or camera ready. He was taking pictures constantly. I started feeling uncomfortable about his constant presence. The man introduced himself as Wesley. He claimed to be a retired executive. He seemed knowledgeable about travel. He asked thoughtful questions about my photography, about my experiences as a solo traveler. His questions seemed appropriate at first, but then he got too personal. He wanted to know my daily schedule, where I planned to eat, which activities I might attend, what times I returned to my suite. This went beyond normal curiosity. By our first week, I suspected something was wrong. Our encounters weren't coincidental anymore. Wesley always knew where I would be. He appeared at restaurants just as I arrived. He showed up at deck activities right after me. Even when I changed my routine spontaneously, he still found me. The timing seemed impossible unless he was tracking me. I started feeling genuine dread. On our 8th day, everything changed. I returned to my suite early feeling sick. I opened my balcony door for fresh air. I saw Wesley on the adjacent balcony. He had a professional camera with a telephoto lens. He was photographing my suite's interior through my sliding doors. When he saw me watching him, he didn't look embarrassed. He smiled and waved like this was completely normal. That evening, I confronted him about it. He claimed he was documenting ship design for a travel review. His explanation felt rehearsed and fake. Over the next few days, I noticed more disturbing patterns. Wesley had detailed knowledge about my daily routines. He knew which spa treatments I had booked. He knew my dining reservation times. He even knew personal details I hadn't shared with him. When I checked my social media, I discovered something terrifying. Someone had been systematically screenshotting my posts, including old content from previous assignments. This required extensive searching through my online presence. This wasn't spontaneous attraction. This was planned stalking. The most frightening discovery came on our 10th day. I found evidence that Wesley had accessed my suite. Personal items had been moved slightly. My photography equipment had been handled. My clothing had been rearranged. Someone had gone through my belongings systematically. When I reported this to ship security, they were skeptical. They suggested housekeeping might be responsible. But I knew this went far beyond normal cleaning. Someone had been inventorying my personal possessions. The breaking point came on our 11th night. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Someone was trying to open my suite door. I could hear the electronic lock being engaged repeatedly. Someone was trying different key cards. I looked through the peephole. Wesley was standing in the corridor. He was holding multiple key cards. The door finally opened. He had somehow obtained master keys. The terror I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I was trapped in a small room in the middle of the ocean with someone who could access my living space. I activated the emergency communication system. I barricaded myself in the bathroom until security arrived. When they searched my suite, Wesley was gone. They discovered my suite had been thoroughly searched. My photography equipment had been examined. My electronics had been handled. My clothing had been cataloged. When security found Wesley, he claimed he was sleepwalking. He said he accidentally tried the wrong suite. The crew seemed to accept this ridiculous explanation. During my final 3 days, other passengers approached me. They had disturbing information about Wesley's behavior. Several women reported he'd been photographing them without permission. He'd been asking detailed personal questions. He showed the same pattern of coincidental encounters. Most frightening was learning he'd been compiling detailed dossiers on solo female travelers, including photographs and personal information. Documentation of daily routines and preferences. This was systematic and extensive. It involved months of preparation before the cruise began. When I reached Southampton, I contacted authorities. I learned I'd been victim of sophisticated stalking operation. It involved not just Wesley, but other people too. They'd helped him access passenger information. They'd compromised ship security systems. The investigation revealed he'd been targeting solo female travelers on luxury cruise lines for several years. He used his wealth and sophistication to gain trust from cruise staff and passengers, while conducting extensive surveillance and privacy violations. What made it worse was discovering the scope. Photographs and personal information he collected were being sold to third parties through dark web marketplaces that specialized in voyeuristic content and personal data about vulnerable individuals. He'd been secretly recording our conversations, documenting my daily activities in obsessive detail. He'd accessed my electronics to copy photographs, contact information, and private data. This information was potentially shared with unknown individuals. The psychological impact has been devastating. I can no longer work as a travel blogger. The thought of being alone in unfamiliar places triggers panic attacks. I've withdrawn completely from social media, from public-facing work. The legal aftermath was traumatic too. Prosecuting crimes in international waters is complex. Multiple jurisdictions and maritime law complications made it difficult to hold Wesley accountable. The cruise line was more concerned with reputation than addressing security failures. Today, more than 4 years later, I still struggle with the lasting effects of being systematically stalked. The experience taught me predators operate anywhere, including places that seem safe and regulated. The isolation of being at sea makes passengers vulnerable to individuals who exploit cruise social atmosphere. Years of therapy haven't erased the trauma of having privacy so thoroughly violated, knowing my information may still circulate online, has effectively ended my career and limited my ability to enjoy experiences I once loved. My name is Russell, and I'm 67 years old. What happened to me and my wife Dorothy during our 40th wedding anniversary cruise still haunts us. This was supposed to be the perfect celebration, a 12-day Caribbean island hopper aboard a Princess cruise ship. We had been planning this trip for 2 years, saving every penny to make it special. After 4 decades of marriage, we deserved this luxury. But what we encountered during those 12 days at sea defied every medical explanation. It has left us questioning the very nature of reality itself. We chose Princess Cruises because of their reputation for excellent service. Their ships cater to mature travelers like ourselves. The vessel was beautiful, elegant dining rooms, comfortable staterooms, professional staff who treated us like royalty. Our cabin had a small balcony, perfect for morning coffee together. We had planned this trip down to every detail: shore excursions to tropical islands, formal dinners in the main dining room, dancing in the lounge where we had our first dance 40 years ago. The first 3 days were absolutely perfect. We visited St. Thomas and St. Martin. The weather was beautiful, clear blue skies and calm seas. Dorothy looked radiant in her new sundresses. I felt younger than I had in years. We were finally living our dream. Taking photographs at every port, trying new foods together, meeting other couples who were celebrating similar milestones. Everything felt magical and romantic. But on our 4th day, something changed. We both woke up feeling slightly under the weather. Nothing serious at first, just minor stomach discomfort. We assumed it was something we ate, the rich shipboard food. After decades of simple home cooking, we decided to take it easy that day, skipping the planned shore excursion to Barbados. Instead, we stayed aboard, resting in our cabin and enjoying room service. The ship's medical staff assured us it was normal. Travelers often experience minor digestive issues. They recommended bland foods and plenty of fluids. By our 5th day, the symptoms had intensified, but in ways that seemed impossible. Dorothy and I were experiencing identical symptoms at exactly the same times. When she felt nauseous, I felt nauseous. When my stomach cramped, hers cramped too. We thought it was coincidence at first. Couples often share illnesses after being together so long, but the synchronization was perfect down to the minute. If Dorothy needed to vomit, I would feel the urge simultaneously. If I developed a headache, she would reach for her temples at exactly the same moment. The ship's doctor was puzzled by our condition. He had never seen anything like it. Two separate patients experiencing identical symptoms with perfect timing. Blood tests showed similar abnormalities, but nothing he could identify. He suggested we might be experiencing psychosomatic symptoms, stress from travel, combined with our advanced age. But Dorothy and I knew this was different. We had been married for 40 years. We knew each other's bodies and health patterns. This was something entirely new and terrifying. On our 6th day, something even stranger began happening. We started sharing memories that belonged to only one of us. Dorothy would mention events from her childhood that I had never experienced, but I would remember them as clearly as if I had been there. She recalled my first day at the factory job, where I worked for 30 years before we even met. But her memories were perfect, every detail correct, down to the smell of the machine oil and the color of my supervisor's tie. The medical staff was becoming increasingly concerned. Our blood work showed anomalies they couldn't explain. Our brain scans revealed unusual neural activity, patterns that suggested our minds were somehow synchronizing, like two radio stations tuning to the same frequency. But medical science had no explanation, no treatment protocol, no understanding of what was happening to us. They wanted to evacuate us to a hospital, but we were days from any major medical facility. By our 7th day, we could feel each other's thoughts. Not telepathy exactly, but something deeper. I would think about our grandchildren and Dorothy would start talking about them without any conversation starter. She would remember our wedding day, and I would smell her bouquet of roses as if I were experiencing her memories directly. We were becoming the same person, two bodies sharing one consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying simultaneously. Other passengers began avoiding us. They could sense something was wrong. The way we moved in perfect unison, how we would speak the same words at exactly the same time, finish each other's thoughts. Not like an old married couple, but like one mind operating two bodies. The ship's staff was frightened too. They had never encountered anything like our condition. Medical personnel kept us isolated in our cabin, mostly coming by to check on us, but offering no real help. As on our 8th day, we discovered other passengers were beginning to show similar symptoms. Not as advanced as ours, but the same synchronization patterns. Couples who had been married for decades, experiencing identical health issues. At identical times, the medical bay was filling up with passengers who couldn't explain why they were sharing symptoms with their spouses with perfect timing and intensity. The ship's medical team was overwhelmed. They had never seen anything like this outbreak. It wasn't following normal disease patterns. No infectious agent they could identify. No environmental cause they could trace. Just couples who had been together for many years, slowly merging into single consciousness, sharing memories and thoughts and physical sensations, like we were becoming one person, split between two bodies. By our 9th day, Dorothy and I could barely tell where she ended and I began. We moved as one person, thought as one mind, felt every sensation together. When I touched the cabin wall, she could feel the texture. When she looked out the balcony, I could see the ocean. Through her eyes, we were becoming something new, something beyond human experience. But the process was accelerating. The most terrifying part was realizing we didn't want to stop it. The merging felt natural, like we were finally becoming what we were always meant to be. After 40 years of marriage, we were truly becoming one flesh, one mind, one soul. But I could see the fear. In the eyes of the medical staff, they didn't understand what we were becoming. They saw it as a disease, something to be cured. On our 10th day, we made a discovery that changed everything. While exploring the ship's lower decks, looking for answers about our condition, we found a restricted area, near the engine room. Inside were specimens from previous cruises, passengers who had experienced similar merging phenomena, but they had been stopped, separated before completion through surgical intervention and aggressive drug therapy. The specimens showed what happened. When the merging process was interrupted, the patients became hollow shells, neither fully individual nor successfully merged, living in a state of constant confusion, unable to form coherent thoughts or maintain separate identities. They existed in a limbo between two states of being, neither human nor something beyond. It was a fate worse than death. We realized then that the cruise line knew about this phenomenon, had been studying it for years, using their ships as floating laboratories to observe how long-term couples could be transformed through unknown means into something beyond normal human experience. We were not patients. We were test subjects in an experiment we never consented to. The final 3 days of our cruise were spent in hiding, avoiding the medical staff who wanted to separate us. Before the merging could complete, we had seen what happened. To couples who were interrupted, we refused to become those hollow shells living in perpetual confusion, neither individual nor unified. We would complete the process on our own terms. When we finally disembarked, we were no longer two separate people. We were something new, something that medical science couldn't understand or classify. We shared one consciousness across two bodies. We could feel each other's pain, think each other's thoughts, experience each other's memories as if they were our own. Today, 3 years later, Dorothy and I still exist as this merged entity. We function in the world as two separate people, but we know the truth. We are one being living in two bodies. The cruise line continues to operate their floating laboratory, studying couples like us, transforming long-term relationships into something beyond human understanding. But they never completed their research on what we actually became. We still don't understand the full implications of what happened to us on that anniversary cruise. We only know that love can transcend the boundaries of individual identity in ways that science cannot explain or control. And sometimes the greatest gift is becoming something beyond what you thought possible. Even if the world cannot understand what you have become. The other couples from our cruise who experienced similar symptoms were not as fortunate. The medical intervention left them damaged, unable to be truly individual or successfully merged. They exist in hospitals now in a state that resembles living death, neither fully human nor transformed into something greater. We were the only ones who completed the process successfully. We never reported what happened to any authorities who would believe us, that a cruise ship could facilitate such a transformation, that love could transcend the boundaries of individual consciousness, that two people could become something entirely new while maintaining their humanity in ways that defied every medical understanding of what it means to be human. Sometimes we wonder if other couples aboard cruise ships are experiencing similar phenomena. If the isolation of being at sea combined with decades of shared love can trigger transformations that science cannot explain. We hope they are stronger than the fear of medical intervention and can complete the process as we did together.